So the question is, and tell me if this is correct, when you experience some kind of upset, when you get triggered and emotions arise, take anger, for example, because anger is an emotion that a lot of people have a lot of problems with, right? Acting out anger. So when something happens and you get triggered, an emotion arises, right? And you're feeling the pressure of that emotion to get expressed, which is the case often with anger. And there's a thought process that's running, okay? And you're in a reaction. And when I say you're in a reaction, I mean when you get triggered, it means that there is some threat that you're experiencing, some threat, because the personality can feel threatened in any number of different ways. It doesn't take a lot to make a personality feel threatened, right? All you have to do is drive a little, have somebody driving not fast enough in front of you on the highway. That's all it takes for the personality to feel threatened, right? So if you really look at that, you can see, there's a whole host of possibilities when it comes to the personality getting threatened. And so when you get triggered, which means that the personality experiences some kind of threat, then what happens in a nanosecond, right, is that the brain searches for a memory of something that is as close to what's happening as possible. And it does this very quickly. And when it finds something from your past that is close to what's happening as possible, it brings that up, and you begin to think the thoughts you thought then, feel the way you did then, and start to behave the way that you did then. This is important to understand. This is the mechanism. This is the mechanicalness of the mind. And the reason it does that is because the logic of it is, if I do what I did then, whether it has anything to do with what's actually happening now or not, if I do what I did then, according to the logic of the system, I will survive. And this is the survival operation. The system is based on survival, right? I will survive. I know I'll survive. The reason I know I'll survive is because I did what I did then, and I'm still here. That's the logic of the system, right? And so the behavior becomes mechanical and automatic, and it's fueled by the emotion, right? And so when that happens, you have all these thoughts occur, okay? And it could be that the situation is completely neurotic, and you really have no reason to be upset. You're totally misreading the situation, misreading the other person's behavior, and so forth and so on. If that's the case, and you're sufficiently practiced, you'll be able to recognize that before it hits your mouth. You'll be able to recognize that before you begin to act it out. And you'll be able to see, this is not a good idea. I don't want to identify myself with this. And so I'm going to shift. Instead of relating to this, I'm going to shift and start just paying more attention to this, what's really happening, because I want to get related to what's really happening so I can respond to it instead of react to it. This is the psychotherapeutic practice of training your mind. This is the psychotherapeutic practice of using being awake to live, instead of just being an extension of a mechanical operation that's coming from the mind. Okay? Now, so if you see that it's just neuroticism, right, and therefore you don't give it any more of your attention, you don't speak it, you don't act it, and when that happens, it just dissipates. Okay? And the more you do that, by the way, with material like that, the more you do that, eventually the material stops coming up at all, right? Because you're withdrawing the energy that needs to exist. Any neural pattern needs your attention. That's the energy. Any neural pattern that you give your attention to and you participate with is considered to be valid, considered to be realistic, just by virtue of the fact that you're interacting with it. Okay. So if it's totally neurotic, then you just want to recognize that and let it go. However, what if you feel strong emotion and thoughts are occurring, And when you look at it, you realize, well, there's some aspect of it that is neuroticism, but there's really something here that's unworkable. Workability is the real key to determining whether or not to behave, right? If something's unworkable. If something's just neuroticism, right, has nothing to do with what's going on right now, so you don't even deal with workability. But if you're looking at it and you say, wait a minute, there's something here that is something's unworkable. And so I want to see, is there something I need to say or do to address the unworkability of the situation, okay? And then, if you're practiced enough, right, and you're dealing with another person, right, or you're dealing with your boss, or your wife, or your parents, or your children, right, then what you will do next is look to see what would be a way that I could speak this or behave with this that would produce the result that I want, that would produce the workability that I want. And if I'm going to operate this way, I have to be aware, I have to be here and actually be present and actually be aware of who I'm dealing with and the condition they're in, okay? Because if they're in an upset state in such a way where no matter what I do, they're not going to hear me because they're in their own reaction, right? Then that's very important for me to realize, right? Because then no matter what I do, it's still going to go bad because they're going to react to something that's not happening, just like I was going to react to something that's not happening if I was being neurotic, okay? So that's part of it, right? And if that's the case, right, then maybe the appropriate, workable thing to do is not to say or do anything at that time, and make a note to yourself at some point in the future when this person is available and not upset, right? When things are calm, then I will talk about the situation in a way that doesn't make the other person wrong, and you don't have to walk away being upset and holding on to your upset and all that stuff. You don't have to have resentment, and you can really establish a workable connection with the people that you're dealing with. But you have to have the ability, you have to have access to all possible responses. That's the reason why you don't want to be limited by your personality. Because your personality is a very limited collection of possible behaviors, isn't it? It's your conditioning. In other words, you can't say or do anything that's not part of your conditioning. You can't. Because whatever you could say or do that's not part of your conditioning is outside of what's in your brain. It's not in your brain. You can't get access to it, okay? So that's why you have to understand that when you understand that what plays in your mind will always be very limited because it will always be coming from your conditioning. And what you're up to is getting access to all possible ways to behave. I took a course in leadership a few years back. It was a 7-day course with one of the world's experts in ontological training. Ontology is the study of being. And the name of this course was, it was a course in leadership. And the name of the course was, What is the Being of a Leader? What is the being of a leader, you know? And that was a lot, the reason I took the course was because that was a lot different from all the other leadership material that I've ever seen. You know, they always talk about what are the qualities of a good leader and that type of thing. No, but this was saying what is the being of a leader? What is the being of a leader when the person is being a real leader? And the answer, and what I discovered in that course is the being of a leader is somebody that can be awake and aware sufficiently, right, to not be limited by what their thoughts are or what their emotions are, and stay open to all possible ways of responding to the situation you're dealing with, and then you're going to be an effective leader, okay? So the answer to your question is when this happens, right, first of all, you have to be awake to notice that you're now the program is now running a survival operation. You've got to be awake enough to see that. If you don't see that and you just identify with it and you participate with it, it's going to take over and determine what you say and do. And that's and most of the time that's not going to work. Every once in a while it works, and then we think that we know what we're doing. But then the other times that it doesn't work, proves to us that we only think we know what we're doing, and we're basing one workable situation against hundreds of unworkable situations, and that's stupidity. So when it happens, you have to first of all be awake enough to notice that it happened, to notice that upsetting material is now playing, and then you have to be able to see whether it's just neuroticism or whether there's something about it that really needs to be addressed and dealt with. And then you have to be able to come up with what will the behavior or the speaking be that will allow me to effectively address the situation, right, without making anybody else wrong, and having the goal of the whole expression that I'm going to get involved with be workability, what will work. Do you follow that? It's a process. But you're not even, that process isn't even impossible unless you at least have enough of an understanding of what the difference is between you being the person and you being aware and awake as the consciousness itself. That's why we practice meditation, right? Because if your life is a life that you can only deal with from the view and the position and the operations, the mental operations, the emotional operations of a personality, your life is going to be very limited, very unsuccessful, with a lot of suffering. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. I mean, look, if you look at your own experience and you just watch human behavior, you watch other people around you, you see it all day long, you know? As soon as people come in contact with something that appears to them to be a threat to them, they go right into crazy behavior. You know, you see it all the time around you. And you see it in your own life too. I mean, if you look back in your life, right, when we get to around adolescence, right, when we get to around adolescence, that's when comparing yourself to other people becomes a big deal. You know what I mean? When you were an adolescent in school, right, if you weren't on the in crowd, you were suffering. If you didn't dress the right way, you were suffering. You know, fitting in is a real big deal during that time. And so you're very vulnerable as an ego. You have a very vulnerable ego, right? That's why teenagers are so dangerous. Because they can go off in a minute and, you know, they're not sophisticated enough yet. They have very little insight into their true nature, right? And so they do a lot of acting out. They do a lot of acting out. So you see a lot of crazy behavior. And you have to excuse them. They're doing the best they can. See, that's one of the things that we overlook as far as human behavior is concerned. Human beings, this is axiomatic. This is true, always true. Human beings are always doing the best they can. It's always true. Why would anybody not be doing the best they can? You know, when we misunderstand other people's behavior, our misunderstanding is they could do that differently, isn't it? That's why we get annoyed, right? We think they know they could do that differently and they're just not doing it, right? That's why we get annoyed. We don't have any patience, right? But the truth is always, human beings are always doing the best they can. That's always true. And you should live with that. You should be clear about that so you don't start going off on people or beating people up or getting into conflict with people unnecessarily when they're only doing the best they can. There's only two possibilities for human behavior. Either the person is just sleeping, right? They're just in a dream and they have no real clue what's going on, right? In which case you should have compassion for them, right? The other one is they do know what's going on, right? And they believe that what they're doing makes sense when it doesn't. In that case, you should have any more compassion for them. And they're the only two possibilities. So if you could operate that way where you were seeing other people's behavior that way, right? It would allow you to be a lot kinder. It would allow you to be a lot more gentle. It would allow you to be willing to take some time and examine what's going on in your mental activity in terms of you're feeling threatened and you're having a survival operation going on in your mind, to take the time to be present to that and see it for what it is so that it doesn't run your life. If you don't do that, if you never do that, look at what's going to be running your life. A survival operation. And the survival operation will react and go into fight, flight, or freeze modality whenever anybody or anything in your environment occurs to you to be threatening. And if you pay attention, that's going on all the time when it comes to the personality, right? Anything that invalidates the personality, right? Anytime somebody says something to you that you shouldn't have to put up with, that's a threat to the personality. I mean, when you feel like, well, you don't get to talk to me that way, that's a threat to the personality, right? And then when you say you don't get to talk to me that way, the other person that you're saying that to experiences that to be a threat to their personality, right? And then if that doesn't get seen for what it is, fight or flight plays mechanically. You have nothing to say about what happens next, and then when you calm down later, you can go into the guilt stuff. And if you're Catholic, you can go to a confession, and get your terrible sins forgiven. Don't forget, the word sin, this is something that is amazing because it amazes me how many people don't know this. The word sin comes from archery, and the word actually means you missed the target. That's what it means, right? But it took on the meaning in Christianity like sin means that you did something wrong that requires punishment. And so you should confess for those sins, and you should do a contrition for those sins. This is a very sad and dark way of seeing human beings. It's really a sad, dark way of seeing human beings, and it doesn't serve any purpose at all. It makes people a lot crazier. So if you understand that, then I would highly advise you, if you consider yourself to be a sinner, or you think you're capable of sinning in the old definition, I would highly recommend that you cast out that definition and start to look at it in a different way. Because if you start to look at it in a different way, you realize when what I do doesn't work, I'm not a sinner, I just made a mistake. What's a mistake? A mistake is a mistake. If you're a photographer, why do you shoot so many rolls of film to get one good shot, right? Because the rest of them are mistakes. They weren't the shot that you wanted, right? So mistake doesn't mean that anything's wrong. It means that the way you took it was an incorrect reading of the situation. And that's what's going on most of the time when you're in the form of a personality. You're misreading things all day long. You're even misreading your own behavior. You're even considering your mistakes to be terrible things that you should be punished for. That's a hell of an existence to live in. I don't recommend that for anybody. It's the source of a lot of addiction, by the way. Yeah, the reason people are addicted to things to alter their experiences because they can't stand being with themselves. That's the truth. They can't stand being with themselves. They're looking for, they'll trade off all kinds of things, workable relationships with other human beings, a functional life. They'll trade off all kinds of things to get a little relief from having this experience that I'm having. A little relief from having this experience I'm having. And then, of course, once, if the addiction is to something like heroin or something with serious drugs, then the addiction has a life of its own. Then it demands that you maintain it. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it certainly does. It was very interesting
Okay, good.
what you just said, especially what you just said about addiction and you can't stand yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's why people watch TV, to get away from themselves. That's why people do everything to distract themselves. When you distract yourself, what are you distracting yourself from?
Yourself.
Yeah, that's not the way people say it. I enjoy watching football all day long on Saturday and Sunday. But if you didn't watch football all day long on Saturday and Sunday, right, and instead of that, you were in situations where you would be experiencing what's going on in your mind and what emotions you were feeling, that wouldn't be any fun. That's what I don't want to experience. That's what I don't want to experience. So don't make me experience that, Don't say things to me to upset me.
That's why I rationalize, I'm listening to podcasts and webinars and I'm learning.
Well, it's not that can't be the case, right? And that's why being awake is so important, because being awake means that you can see the difference. If you're not awake, you can't see the difference. So being awake means you can see the difference. So there's one thing, I heard something the other day that I thought was really valuable and important, and so I wanted to just mention it, see if you can catch this, right? The way the teachings go and the way a lot of people hear the teachings is they think, okay, what I want to do is realize that I am not the personality. Sound familiar? I want to realize I am not the personality. The personality isn't real. It never was real, right? And when I'm being that, I'm being something that doesn't exist and it isn't real. So I don't want to be the personality. So if I'm clear that I'm not the personality and I'm practicing being awake in such a way where I'm not the personality, then what I am instead of the personality is the conscious awareness, right? I'm the conscious awareness, right? Now, what gets lost in this, right, is the teachings tell us there is no self. There is no such thing as a self. But what happens is there is a mechanism in the head that as soon as you say, I'm not the personality, and you're really clear that's true, and so you let go of that, right? The identity will move itself over to being, the self will now be the consciousness. It's a mechanism. The mechanism that the head is will not allow there not to be a self. Because the way the mechanism is organized, right, that to be in this world, I have to be a self. I have to identify with this body. I have to identify with being a personality. So then if it is the case that when you let go of being a personality, the mechanism shifts your identity and now the self is consciousness. But the teaching says there is no self. So what have you accomplished? Yeah, it just switched it. It's just playing it. It's just, and there's no way out of that, by the way. The mechanism will, no matter what you take yourself to be, the mechanism will just call that a self. It'll just be a self. And you won't even notice it happen, right? But now you'll say things, oh, I'm really experiencing a new sense of peace and contentment in my life because now I am awareness and consciousness instead of the personality. But isn't that a self? That's still a self. Yeah. So what you have to do is understand the mechanism cannot be stopped, but you can watch it and not identify with it. That's all you have to do is realize you can't get out of that. You can't get out of that, but you never were that. So all you have to do is see it for what it is.